We mentioned we're getting ready for the holiday of Shavuot next Thursday evening. It's going to be a little bit of a different of Shavuot for all of us as we try to deal with restrictions that we have in our celebration. But as everything else that we do, we find a way. We find a way to climb our mountain, the mountains that are in front of us. But if we think about Shavuot and the highlight of the holiday of Shavuot, we have the giving of the Torah. And where was it given? It wasn't just given in the Sinai area. It was given on the Sinai mountain, on Har Sinai, on the mountain of Sinai. Why a mountain? Why did it have to be given on a mountain? Why did Moses have to climb a mountain to the top of the mountain? Why couldn't God give the mountain, the 10 commandments on flat land? What is it about a mountain that makes it so important that the most important event of our history, of Jewish history, the most important event of all of history, takes place on a mountain? So we find that the focus of the mountain didn't begin in the book of Exodus. If we rewind to the first book of the 5 books of Moses, there too we find the story of a mountain. The most dramatic story, perhaps, in all of the Torah is the story we call the Akedah. The Akedah is the binding of Isaac. Abraham, who revolutionizes the world and challenges the world to believe in monotheism, to believe in one God. Abraham is challenged in his life by God with 10 tests. This is going to be the patriarch. This is going to be the father of the Jewish people. And therefore, Abraham's own faith needs to be of perfection. And to reach this level of perfection, God will put him through 10 different challenges, 10 tests to see his faith. And the Torah goes ahead and tells us in detail these tests, and it concludes with the final of the 10 tests. So famous is this 10th and final test that we say it in our prayers every single day. And on Rosh Hashanah, when so many of the Jewish people are gathered together, that is the story that is read from the Torah. The binding of Isaac as God comes to Abraham after all these years of wanting and longing for a child with Sarah, and the miracle birth takes place, and Isaac is born, and Isaac is growing up to follow in the ways of Abraham, and this relationship develops between Abraham and Isaac, a very close relationship. We're very clear, Abraham knows he now has a successor in the world, someone that will carry the torch and carry the mission forward. Out of nowhere, God comes to him and says, and now I want you to take your son, your only son, the son that you love, and bring him to the place that I will show you, and offer him there as an offering, the binding of Isaac. Now, you know the end of the story, I believe. And the end, an angel calls out, Abraham, Abraham, this was just a challenge of your faith. Don't touch your son. He's going to be blessed. And now I know that you indeed have complete and perfect faith, and your children and your descendants will be blessed because of this. But again, my focus on bringing up the story of the binding of Isaac tonight is because when he arrives to the place that he was told to go, he has to climb a mountain. He has to once again climb. And again, we find this focus of the mountaintop and the climb of the mountain being an important focus of the story. Now, as it turns out, that mountaintop, which Abraham climbs together with his son Isaac, becomes the mountaintop of the Temple Mount. It's the place where later the Beis Hamikdash, the holy temple, will stand. And so again, mountaintop. Why a mountain? If Abraham had to go to do this, he had to challenge himself to see if he will withhold his child from God. Why does he need to climb a mountain at the end of the 3-day journey? The 3 days of agony wasn't enough for him. He needed to climb the mountain. So the focus of my question is, what is it about a mountain? And what does it say to us? What do these stories mean to us, especially in the time period that we are living through? So for one thing, when you talk about climbing a mountain, you know it's not an easy journey. You see, when we walk on flatlands, even if we're taking a nice hike and a long hike, we may get tired, we may need more water, but we can manage because it's flatland. The moment we talk about a mountain climb, now we know it's strenuous. Now it's difficult. For most of us, we can climb a small mountain, but when the mountain gets steeper and more difficult, we need training for that. We need years and years, perhaps, of training. So what we're talking about a mountain, the climbing of a mountain, it immediately connotates that it's not going to be an easy journey, that there's going to be challenge and there's going to be struggle involved. For another reason, mountaintop has the connotation of solitude, of being alone, of removed, of isolated from the rest of society. You're out there and you're up there and you're there on your own. You see, when Abraham did what he did, he was very much alone. He didn't take out any full page ads. He didn't send out any emails. He didn't put it on Facebook saying, I'm about to go on this journey that God is sending me on to bring my son upon the mountaintop and offer him as an offering. He didn't publicize it to the news by sending out a press release. He didn't tell anyone. And who amongst his contemporaries would applaud him for doing this? No one. Who would admire him for the depth of his commitment and the power of his sacrifice? No one. Who would cheer him on? Nobody. And yet there he is, waking up early in the morning, taking that lonely journey to carry out the will of God. Abraham met God alone on the top of a mountain. Humanity, civilization as we know it, exists today because of what he brought to the world, because of the vision that he had, because of the sacrifice that he had, because of the faith that he had, because he had the courage to meet God on top of a mountain. My friends, the story of Abraham is not just the story about an individual. The image of our great-grandfather making that climb up the mountain is not just his story. It's our story. It's my story, and it's your story. It's the Jewish story. The Akedah, the binding of Isaac, not only applauds what Abraham did on that mountaintop 3,700 years ago, but applauds each and every single Jew who meets God alone on the top of a mountain. Those of us who step up with courage of our convictions, ready to make sacrifices in our lives, whether big or small, even when no one out there will be singing our praises or patting us on the back for doing what we do. To meet God alone on the top of a mountain. When it comes to Jewish practice, and for some that perhaps are watching, you haven't been brought up with tradition, and you begin to discover what it's all about. And suddenly you're considering going kosher. You start checking out products. You start looking for this OU symbol that someone taught you about, or the OK symbol. You start looking for what's called a hashkacha. You start learning. You start figuring things out, separation of dairy and meat. You start going to lectures or going to lectures now on Zoom to start learning more and more about it. And some of your family members that grew up with you in perhaps non-traditional circles are looking at you saying, what are you doing? Why are you making these changes? Why suddenly do you have to have changes in your lifestyle? But you're at peace with yourself because you know you're meeting God alone on the top of your mountain. Let me tell you a story about Charlie from Chicago. For a number of years, Charlie was attending Torah study classes at a local Jewish institute. And he loved the intellectual stimulation. He loved the discussions. He loved the learning. He loved the debating. He loved study. But it wasn't affecting him, the person. It was just the study. It was the pursuit of knowledge, pursuit of education. It was fascinating. Even Talmud study was fascinating. The debates and the arguments, he loved it. But after a while, after the detailed study, at some point it starts connecting to his soul. And he starts feeling the connection. And one day, after chatting with the rabbi of the institute, the subject of commitment came up. It's one thing to keep studying, Charlie, for all these years, but what about taking some of that which you're studying and put it into practice? And Charlie said, you know, I've been thinking about that for a while, and I actually decided a major decision. I have decided to take on one mitzvah, Now, usually when we say we're taking on one mitzvah, we take on something small and we begin to climb from there. Charlie said that he was going for a big one, and he was going for kosher. He wanted to go kosher. And he told the rabbi of this institute that starting tomorrow, I'd like to begin to keep kosher. So he tells the rabbi, I'm going to need you to come over to my kitchen tomorrow, and tomorrow I'm going to do this, and tomorrow he's going to do that. And at some point, the rabbi said, it's wonderful. I can't stop complimenting you, the courage that you have, and by all means, I'll help you. I'll go step by step with you. I just want to ask you something. You keep repeating the word tomorrow. If you want to make this commitment, why wouldn't you make it today? Let's start now. To which Charlie said, don't push yourself. Don't push yourself on me now. I said tomorrow, give me my one day. Okay, no problem. Why indeed did Charlie want to start tomorrow, not today? Well, it's like this. Before going cold turkey, he wanted to frequent one particular restaurant that he went to more than any other place. Now, I've never been there, but I've been told by the people that live in Chicago, it's quite popular in Chicago. It's a fast food place called Superdog. And Superdog was famous for their Superdog. It was a special type of hot dog that people would wait for, and people just love these particular hot dogs. And Charlie was one of the biggest fans of these hot dogs. And therefore, he wanted to visit Superdog one more time and have one more Superdog hot dog before he would say goodbye to this lifestyle for the rest of his life. And so he visits his place just as he had planned, and he's sitting down by this table, ready to dig in, ready to eat what for him would be this last Superdog. As he's about to take this first bite, some friendly guy sits down and says, anyone else sitting here? He says, no. So he sits down. The two begin chatting. They have children that turns out attends the same school. They start talking about life. And Charlie begins to eat his hot dog. He says, wow, is this good? So the fellow says, you seem to really, really love these hot dogs. He says, oh yeah, these are the best. These are the best, but this is my last one. To which the fellow says, last one, why? If you love it so much, why is this your last one? Now he's sitting with a stranger. He doesn't know the fellow is Jewish or not. He's not going to understand kosher. He doesn't want to come across as if he's joining some cult. So he simply makes up a story and he says, well, economic times are difficult for our family. We've decided that we have to cut down and we're cutting out all fast food foods. And we're cutting out going to restaurants, and therefore I'm giving it up because our budget doesn't allow for it. So the fellow says, well, it's your lucky day because I happen to be the owner of Superdog. I own this place. And he takes out his wallet and he hands him this gold coupon. And the gold coupon says it's for life, free Superdogs for life. To which he says to Charlie, it's your lucky day. You can come as often as you want. You can enjoy your favorite fruit as often as you want. Nothing to worry about. He's like won the lottery here. So Charlie is so upset. He's upset at God. Why are you doing this to me? And he runs back to the rabbi and he says, this is so unfair. This is so unfair. God knows that this is my biggest struggle. He knows that the biggest challenge for me is giving up my Superdog. So what does he have to do? On the night before my great sacrifice, he puts this in front of me and he shows the rabbi the card. This is what he does to me. So the rabbi said to him, you see, you think you just encountered a mountain that you can't climb. But the truth is, the reason God put this before you is because he wants to show you just how strong you are, just how courageous you are, just how much strength you have within you. The strength of your conviction that even if he was to challenge you and put this card in your hands, you'll still be able to do it. So the reason God did this is because he loves you. And he wants you to see for yourself the potential that you have. Charlie did indeed stick to his commitment. And in time, the mitzvah of kosher led to another mitzvah, followed by another and another. And today, if you were to visit Charlie and be invited to his Shabbos table and sit in his dining room, you would see a large picture frame. And the entire picture is empty. It's just white matting. But right in the middle is a small little gold card from Superdog, a lifetime supply of Superdog. And under it are the following words: "This is my constant reminder of how much God believes in me." Sometimes when we have these mountains to climb and we kvetch and we complain a lot, really it's God putting this mountain before us, telling us, you can climb it. Find the strength within you to climb the mountain. When your weekend takes on a whole new meaning because you've introduced your family to the beauty of Shabbat, when you start checking your watch Friday afternoons to see what time it is it time for candle lighting yet? You're meeting God alone on the top of a mountain. You may not be going the whole 9 yards yet. You may not be doing the entire Shabbos observant yet, but you're coming along, one step of the mountain, the next step, and the next step. You make time to go to Torah classes, or you wake up in the morning to wrap tefillin before you begin your day, or you make sure your doors have mezuzahs on them. You're meeting God on the top of your mountain. Now, we each have a mountain to climb, and we each have our own challenges to meet, and we each have our own tests that we have to withstand. You see, it wasn't just Abraham that God put these challenges and these tests and these mountains before us. Each and every single descendant of Abraham has these mountains. I remember hearing about this woman who heads up a major business in New York City, and she began attending classes, and she too, like Charlie, decided it was time to go kosher, and she too, like Charlie, invited her rabbi to our apartment to look and to show her what needs to change and how to kosher the kitchen and how to kosher the oven and how to separate the dishes. And the rabbi sees a box of chiclet gums. It's a type of gum on the counter. And he comments to the woman, by the way, these don't have proper certification, so these are going to have to go. The woman gasps and she says, what? I have to give up my chiclet's gum? Forget it. I'm not doing it. Drop the whole thing. She's ready to drop the whole kosher because the rabbi said she can't have her gum. So the rabbi calmed her down and said, there's other gums out there. I love gum too. I'll show you all the different varieties that have kosher gums. And ultimately, she koshered the kitchen. Now, I don't tell you this to mock her or to belittle her. On the contrary, I tell you this because every single one of us, each and every single one that's on this class right now, we each have our own chiclets gum. We have that which for us we feel is the greatest mountain, whereas 99% of the other people watching it will say, chiclets gum, that's your problem? But for her, it was real. Each and every one of us, we have those chiclets gum, we have those challenges that for us is difficult to overcome. For us, it's a steep mountain. Yet God is telling us, by putting this challenge before us, you have the strength to take it step by step and make your way up the mountain. Some of you may have heard of a well-known professor. His name was Dr. Velvel Green of blessed memory, Alav Shalom. And we have had the privilege and the honor of having him speak at the Conejo Jewish Academy numerous times over the past decades. At first, he made Aliyah to Israel at the latter part of his life, but he originally lived in Minnesota. And he was an eminent scientist. He worked for NASA. He was very popular, very well known, and he was also quite secular. And he started getting involved slowly, became very friendly with the Chabad emissary of Minnesota, Rabbi Moshe Feller. And Rabbi Feller introduced him to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He began written correspondence to the Rebbe over many, many years. And slowly but surely, he began to see the universe in a new light. He would write many questions to the Rebbe about science and Torah. But still, there were things about the essence of Judaism that bothered him. He wasn't buying into all of it, but he was beginning to get involved, beginning to get warmed up. but the full commitment he wasn't ready for. Now, one day, before he's about to leave on a business trip, and Rabbi Feller knew he was leaving, Rabbi Feller calls him up and says, Velvel, I understand you're leaving tonight, yes? I want to ask you for a favor. What's the favor? So he says, before you get on the flight, I want you to call the airlines, and I want you to order a kosher meal. Kosher meal? I don't keep kosher. I know. But if you're going on the plane and you're going on a flight, order the kosher meal. It can't hurt. Why would I order a kosher meal if I don't keep kosher? Well, for starters, it's a good thing to be on good terms when you're up there in God's space. It's a good idea. And for secondly, it's called the Kiddush Hashem. People know who you are. You're quite popular. They're going to see that Professor Velvel Green is eating kosher. It will leave an impression on them, and maybe it'll inspire them to keep kosher. So although you're not doing it yet, imagine you have the ability to inspire people. I need to remind some of you that in the olden days, they actually used to serve meals on the airplane. They used to come around with their carts and they would say, what would you like to have? They're now only on international flights. Now maybe you're lucky if you get some potato chips. All right, Velvel Green says, Rabbi Feller, I think this is idiotic, but is it important to you? Would it make you happy? Fine. He calls the airlines. He orders the kosher meal. Okay, he's on the flight. The attendants, we used to call them stewardesses, now they're called flight attendants, comes around with their cart, and they say, are you having chicken or beef? Each one, chicken or beef, and they're giving out the trays. And it comes to Rabbi Feller, Professor Feller, and Professor Green. And Professor Green says, excuse me, I ordered a kosher meal. Oh, the flight attendant says, oh, okay, and what's your name? Velvel Green. Professor Velvel Green. Okay, we'll be back soon with your kosher meal. And 5 minutes go by, 10 minutes go by, 15 minutes go by, nobody's coming back. And so Professor Green is ringing the bell. And the flight attendant comes back and says, yes. He says, yes, you told me you're going to get my kosher meal. I ordered a kosher meal. Remember, Professor Green. Every time he says his name, he says it loud. He says it loud so that everyone should hear on the plane that Professor Green ordered the kosher meal because that's what Rabbi Feller wanted. So yes, I'm Professor Green and I ordered the kosher meal. I'll be right back. I got to check and see. I got to find it for you. We'll warm it up for you. And another 15 minutes go by and the flight attendant returns and the flight attendant has that look on her face. It's that look that tells you you're going to be hungry. It's that look that says there must have been some mistake. I'm so sorry. Somehow there was a break in the communication, but we don't have any kosher meals on the plane. Would you like chicken or meat? Now at that moment, Professor Green was about to say, I'll take the steak because he didn't keep kosher. But he just made such a fuss for the last 30 minutes. And every passenger on that plane knows that Professor Green wanted his kosher meal. It's not going to look good if suddenly he says, yeah, I'll take the tray for meat. So he has to say, no, I can't have the non-kosher food. I need a kosher meal. But they don't have any kosher food. So he's very hungry. And he describes to his audience when he would tell this story just how hungry he was and how upset he was. He was upset at the airlines. How do you mess up like that? I called, I made the reservations. Okay, it was in the last minute, but I made it nevertheless. He was upset at God. I'm in your territory here. This is your neighborhood. You should have seen that I had my meal. But he said, as upset as I was at the airlines and as upset as I was at God, I was really upset at Rabbi Feller. This was his idiotic idea. This was a dumb idea. I told him it was a dumb idea, and yet he insisted on it. The flight was a stopover, and it stops off at midnight in some other airport somewhere in America. He's got a 1-hour layover. He gets off the plane, and I'm sorry tonight for telling 2 stories about hot dogs, but it just happens to be the hot dog night. And maybe I'm hungry, and maybe I like hot dogs. But the first thing he sees when he comes off into that terminal is a hot dog stand. Different than Charlie's hot dogs, but a hot dog stand nevertheless, and definitely not the kosher kind. And he's really hungry, and he doesn't keep kosher, so he gets online to get himself some food. But he says, no. I'm gonna come right back on this line soon, but first I have some business to take care of. Again, some of you from the older generation would remember that there used to be something called a payphone. A payphone was, if you didn't have your own cell phone, which we didn't have more than 2 decades ago, you would go to a phone and you would actually like put in coins and you would make a phone call. Now, some of you may remember, what if you're making a long distance call and you're not traveling with $9.75 in quarters in your pocket? What do? So if you remember, there used to be something called a collect call. By the nodding of your heads, do you remember what a collect call was? Right? The other guy is going to have to pay for the call. So you get on the phone with an operator. You tell the operator, I'm making a collect call. The operator waits for someone to pick up. I have a collect call for you. Will you accept the charges? If they accept the charges, they're paying for the call, and it's an expensive call. But there was one call that was even more expensive than that, and that was called a person-to-person collect call. That was that you only want to speak to one individual in that house, and if that individual is not there, you don't want to speak to anybody. Person-to-person collect call is a very expensive call. It's midnight. He's hungry. He's going to get his hot dog, but not yet. He goes to the payphone. He makes a person-to-person collect call for Rabbi Moshe Feller. Rabbi Feller's wife answers the phone. I have a person-to-person collect call for Rabbi Moshe Feller from Professor Green. Will you accept the charges? She wakes up, Moshe, something is wrong. The professor's calling you collect, person-to-person collect. Should I accept the call? Of course, accept it. So she accepts the call. And Rabbi Feller gets on the phone. Professor, what's wrong? What's wrong? Thinking the worst. He says, Rabbi Feller, you remember you called me. You told me that you wanted me to go ahead and order a kosher meal. Yes, I remember. And do you know that I did that? And I'm very proud of you. Thank you very much. Well, I will have you know that they did not have my kosher meal. I will have you know that I was up there 35,000 feet up in the air in God's territory, and I was starving, and I was very, very hungry. I will have you know that my flight has a stopover. I will have you know that I am 10 feet away from a non-kosher hot dog stand. I will have you know that I'm going to buy me not just one, but I'm going to buy 2 hot dogs. But I didn't want to buy it until I woke you up to tell you that I will think about you every single bite I take. Rabbi Feller says, thank you so much for calling and for notifying me. And I hope you have a hearty appetite. However, I have one thing to say to you, and that is as follows. Professor Green, in every one of our conversations, or I shall call them debates, you always challenge me with the following question. Can you summarize all of Judaism in one sentence? That was always your challenge. Can you give me the bumper sticker of Judaism? What's it really all about? You keep giving me these long discourses. I like to hear things summarized. What is it all about? And you've always told me you've never been satisfied with my responses. Well, I have a new one for you. All of Judaism, Professor Green, everything that you want to know about Judaism, about God, comes down to this. Can you hang up the phone with me and walk by the hot dog stand? Good night, Professor. And he hangs up the phone. Now the professor says, well, this guy's nuts. I always thought he was crazy. Now I know that's all of Judaism. If I could walk by this hot dog stand and get on the next flight, that's everything. Get out. And he gets right back online. He's about to order his hot dog. And he says, I froze. I just froze. Because at that moment, it hit me. This is what Judaism is about. God has a personal relationship with each of us, and we each have our challenges, and we each have our mountains to climb. And this is my mountain right now. It may be small. It may just be about a hot dog. It may just be, do I have the strength to walk away? But this is the challenge that God is putting before me right here and right now. This is my Abraham moment. And at that very moment, Professor Green says, I walked away. I got onto my next flight, and I have never touched another piece of non-kosher food again. He met God alone at the top of a mountain in some airport terminal. But he knew that this was his mountain. This was his climb. This was his challenge. We each have our own mountains. We each have our own chiclets. And this is true in all aspects of life, not just when it comes to the ritual, not just when it comes to the spiritual. We each have our own hurdles. We each have our own struggles. We each have our own challenges. We each have our own pekala of tsaris, as they say. And sometimes it really feels like an uphill battle, like we're walking up the steps of an escalator, but the escalator is coming down, and we try making our way up, going against the tide. You know those days. You know those moments. You know those events of your life. There are setbacks. There are disappointments. Not every time that we try to do something good and right do we succeed. Sometimes the initial attempt doesn't work, and we fall, and we fail, and we falter. And sometimes it hurts. It really hurts. And we cry. That's okay too, for that is part of life. Those that go mountain or rock climbing will tell you that not every step results in going higher. Sometimes you slip down a notch, but even that minor setback is part of the process, because life is not a straight line. It's not all on flat earth. Many parts of life are about climbing and struggling in the climb. Not everything is this well-paved road. You see, Judaism's view of a righteous person is not necessarily one who doesn't falter now and then. A righteous person is the one who falls and falls again and again, but gets up each time and continues the climb. So whether your particular mountain is in the arena of your career, business-related matters, relationships with your spouse, relationships with your parents, relationships with your children and grandchildren, relationships with friends, instead of allowing setbacks to send you hurling down the mountain, learn from the experience and use it as a springboard to catapult you to greater heights up the mountain. There's a rather strange, famous biblical story about Jacob. Jacob is returning to his homeland, to the land of Israel, after being away for many years. And he's alone at night, and a mysterious stranger attacks him. And the Torah tells us they wrestle. There's a wrestling match that's going on all through the night until dawn. And the assailant expects Jacob to be an easy victim, but Jacob will not surrender. And the Torah tells us they wrestled all through the night, and Jacob knew that he needed to defend himself, and he fought a brave and valiant fight. And when the assailant sees that he cannot overpower Jacob, he strikes him on the hip, and he dislocates his hip. And despite the pain, Jacob won't surrender. He won't let go. The attacker grows desperate, and he appeals to Jacob to release him from this hold. And Jacob understands that this is no ordinary opponent, but rather this is a heavenly emissary. It was the guardian angel of his brother Esau. And Jacob says, I will not let you go until you bless me. And the angel says, your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Yisrael. Ki sarisa im Elokim, for you have struggled with the divine, you have wrestled with God and with man, and you have prevailed. So what does our very name of Israel mean? What does Yisrael mean? What does it mean to be a Jew? It means that even when you're alone, and even when you struggle, and even when you're wrestling with your faith, you still hang in there and you persevere and you do the right thing and you turn the suffering into a blessing. And that's the story of the Jew. We get up on our feet and we continue climbing the mountain. Back in the 1960s, there was a young Jewish man living in Mexico. His name was Solomon Mizrahi. And Solomon struggled desperately to eke out a living to support his family. He established a small business importing coffee, which he would sell in and around Mexico. It was a very tough and competitive business, and he kept hitting brick walls. One day, Solomon negotiated a deal with a Japanese supplier that wanted to buy a huge amount, that he would be able to buy a huge amount of coffee at an incredible low price. It was this long-term contract, a very, very sweet deal. This was it, Solomon thought, the deal that you dream about, the deal that will change you from being a pauper to being a wealthy man. He signs the contract. He comes home. He celebrates the evening with his wife and his children, saying, we're not going to be living in an apartment anymore. We're going to go tomorrow looking for houses. I will have enough for a down payment on a house. You guys are going to be going to the finest schools. The celebration continued all through the night because this was the deal that he was waiting for. He would now be able to invest it and go from one level of business to the next level of business. The next day, the Japanese supplier showed up at Solomon's office looking very somber. And he said to him, Mr. Mizrahi, the price I quoted you was in error. I made a mistake. I made a terrible mistake. Nevertheless, as an agent for my company, I signed the contract. And my company will be forced to honor the contract, and they want you to know that they are prepared to honor the contract because I signed it on their behalf. I just want you to know that because of my error, I am certain they will fire me for the mistake that I made. Solomon didn't take a minute to make the decision. It took literally a second. He took the contract right in front of this Japanese individual and he ripped it into pieces. And he said, if I'm to be blessed in my life, it will not be on the back of someone who made an error. It will not be on the back of someone else losing their job. Solomon needed to go home that evening and explain to his wife and children that the celebration of the night before was premature, that he felt the need to do the right thing over finding the pot of gold, and that he just threw away the contract and he tore the contract because it was made in error and he didn't want another human being to suffer from it. The big dream was over, and Solomon Mizrahi continued to struggle trying to generate whatever business he could, but no windfall opportunity came along, and he never looked back with regret. A few years later, that same Japanese man left the coffee company, and he went to work as a big executive for an electronic company in Japan. The company had developed cutting-edge technology in its television department, and they decided that they wanted to market their televisions all over Mexico. And they were looking for, can we find one person that we can trust in Mexico that can lead this operation? Without missing a beat, our Japanese friend said, you're looking for one individual that you can trust. There is one such person that I know. His name is Solomon Mizrahi. And maybe he has no experience in the television industry, but he could learn that. But the honesty and the integrity and the ethics that this man has can't be matched. And Solomon Mizrahi was offered this job, a very lucrative job. And finally, his family and his wife, they had what they wanted. They had all of their needs, all of their desires, because of this new career that he had. Solomon Mizrahi eventually became a very wealthy and philanthropic man, supporting many Jewish organizations and worthy causes all over the world. You see, sometimes we think to ourselves, hey, if we cut corners, who does it bother? Everyone else would do it. What does it matter? To whom does it matter? Nobody notices. Nobody knows the difference anyway. You write a check to a worthy cause. If you give 10% of your earnings to charity, we go out of our way to be honest and ethical in our business dealings. We behave in a moral and modest manner. We wake up 3 a.m. to nurse a crying baby or to care for an elderly parent. We eat our kishkes out trying to convince our teenagers to walk a straight line. Who notices? Who applauds us? The struggles we go through on a daily basis. The answer is your biggest fan is applauding you. God Almighty up above. The story of the binding of Isaac climbing the mountain is the story of a man doing the right thing when everyone looks and says, what do you think you're doing and why do you need to do this? That's our story. That's the story we live each and every day, that we do the right thing, that we struggle when no one even knows the struggle to raise our children, the struggle to teach them to do the right thing, the struggle to be honest in business. That battle, that climbing of the mountain is the gift that our Zaidi Abraham gave over to us, that we have the strength to do it. And by the way, when we think that no one out there knows the difference, whether we behave morally or we don't, the truth of the matter is that our children watch us, and they're watching us every single step of the way of life, and they're watching us every step up this mountain, and they observe, and it influences them, even when we have no idea that we're influencing them. I read these words. It was written by a child to their mother. The identity of who wrote it, I don't know, but its insights speak profoundly to every single mother that's out there. And I'll just read it to you. When you thought I wasn't looking, I saw you hang my first painting on the refrigerator, and I immediately wanted to paint another one. When you thought I wasn't looking, I saw you feed a stray cat, and I learned that it was good to be kind to animals. When you thought I wasn't looking, I saw you make my favorite cake for me, and I learned that little things can be very special in life. When you thought I wasn't looking, I heard you say a prayer, and I knew there was a God I can always talk to, and I learned to trust in God. When you thought I wasn't looking, I saw you make a meal and take it to a friend who was ill, and I learned that all you need to help to take care of one another is to put yourself in their position and to feel for them and care for them. When you thought I wasn't looking, I saw you give your time and money to help people who had nothing, and I learned that those who have something should give to those who don't. When you thought I wasn't looking, I felt you kiss me goodnight, and I felt loved and safe. When you thought I wasn't looking, I saw tears come from your eyes, and I learned that sometimes things hurt, but it's all right to cry. When you thought I wasn't looking, I saw how you handled responsibility, even when you didn't feel good, and I learned that I would need to be responsible when I grow up. When you thought I wasn't looking, I looked at you, and I wanted to say, thank you for all the things I saw when you thought I wasn't looking. My friends, they're always looking. Our children and our grandchildren are always looking and learning from everything we do and everything we don't do. And like Isaac, who walked along with his father, if we set the right example, our children will be right there in step with us. When God calls for us to meet him alone on the top of a mountain, we will be able to walk together with our children and our grandchildren and our entire mishpacha, for we will have taught them the courage it takes to climb our mountains. Years ago, Elie Wiesel, the famous author and spokesperson of Conscience, was asked by the Dalai Lama if he would come to see him. He wanted to talk to him. And during their meeting, Wiesel said to him, with all due respect, why was it so important for you to see me? And the Dalai Lama answered, Mr. Wiesel, your people have suffered a lot, and you went into exile 2,000 years ago, but amazingly, you're still here. My people just left our homeland. We are in exile. Teach us how to survive. How did you do it? How did the Jewish people continue to do it? And the truth is that the secret to our survival didn't begin with events 2,000 years ago. It began way before that. It began with a man named Abraham, who met God alone at the top of a mountain. And we've been meeting God on the top of that mountain ever since. Think about it. What are the odds that after all these centuries, that after all this millennia of exile and persecution, that we would still be here in the year 2020? It's because we are a people that know that even when we struggle, that even when we wrestle, that even when we are hurt, that even when we're wounded, we somehow will prevail. Yisrael, it's who we are. It's who you are. We never stop climbing that mountain, and we never will. In his memoir of the Adolf Eichmann trial, Israel prosecutor Gideon Hausner writes that the evil Eichmann Yamach Shemai, he took a paroches. A paroches is the curtain that hangs in front of the ark, that velvet curtain. And he took a paroches that once covered the holy ark in a synagogue in Poland. And in his sickness, and in his evil, and in his ugliness, he hung that curtain at the entry to the gas chamber in the Treblinka concentration camp, so that he would force every Jew about to go to their death to see, and you're walking by the curtain that once hung in a synagogue in front of one of your arks. On that paroches was the words, "This is the gate to God. The righteous will enter it." This sadistic monster, of course, was trying to taunt the Jewish people. This is your gate to God. This is where you're going now. But for the Jews that walked by that curtain, it was a symbol of strength. To them, Zeh Hashar Hashla Hashem Tzadikim Yavo Vo was a powerful message. Ladies and gentlemen, think for a moment. We still have a paroches. We still have an ark. We still have a Torah. We still have synagogues. The Jewish people are still here. We got up. We never gave up. We rose up like lions. This is the hallmark of the Jewish people. This is what we've always been about. Eichmann Yamach Shemai and Hitler Yamach Shemai, they took my father's entire family. They took my grandparents. They took so many of your grandparents. They took our Zaydis and our Bubbies. They took our uncles and our aunts. And these monsters forced our loved ones to walk by that curtain into the gas chambers. But my dear friends, they may have wounded us, but they did not defeat us. Because you see, we took that paroches back, we took that curtain back, and we put them on new arks. Not one, not two, but thousands, tens of thousands. We rebuilt, we transplanted every one of those synagogues. Why? Because we never stop climbing. We do not quit. We may be down, but we're certainly not out. We wrestle back, we wrestle with man, we wrestle with God, but we don't stop our climb. From every bout of adversity, we've rebounded stronger than before. From every episode of destruction, we've rebuilt bigger and better than before. Sure, it would have been easy to quit. It would have been easy to give it up and to throw in the towel and to walk away. But thanks to the path paved by those first Jews in history, that's just not what we're made of. I want to share the story. I believe I heard it from Rabbi Moshe Bryski, told numerous years ago. It's a story that took place in the year 2007. It sounds like a story from the Dark Ages, but it took place in our lifetime. In Baku, Azerbaijan, there's a Jewish woman who married a non-Jew who was loosely affiliated with the Russian Orthodox Church. He was never a practicing or active member of the church, so when the woman told him that she wanted to enroll their 9-year-old daughter in the local Chabad day school called Or Avner, he said fine. It didn't bother him so much. He wasn't that religious. Okay, he belonged to a church, but he never went. And so his wife is asking, can we put our daughter in a Jewish school? Sure, go ahead. As time went on, however, the man began to notice things. The child would come home all animated and excited about her Jewish studies. Her eyes would light up whenever she spoke about the holidays, about prayers, about the Torah portion of the week, about the lessons of the Torah portion. Every Friday night, she would recite these blessings and she would light a candle. And then she would refrain from all weekday activity until the following evening. Something was going wrong here. This is not what he bargained for. You want to go to a school, but suddenly you're changing things in the house. And it started to bother him. What did I say yes to? What did I allow over here? What is my daughter studying? What is she becoming? So one day he says to his wife, listen, if our daughter is going to be doing all these Jewish things, then we have to balance it and at least let her be baptized by my religion. And mother and the daughter were not so happy about this, but the father drew a line in the sand and said, here's the deal. You can continue going to the Jewish school so long as you're baptized in my church. You don't want to be baptized, then you have to drop out of the school. That's your option. And the mother made the decision that, you know what, the school is most important. Her learning and her loving and her dancing to that which she was studying and enjoying so much is not something she can take away. All right, so she'll go through some ceremony. Hopefully it won't mean much to her and move on, but at least she'll have the Jewish school. And so sure enough, they made an appointment for the following Friday afternoon with the priest of a church in a small Russian town. During the meeting, the priest asked the girl if she indeed wanted to become a Christian, if she was prepared to take into her heart everything she's supposed to take into her heart. And she says, no, I'm a Jew. And the father gives her a look and gives the mother a look and says, look, a deal is a deal. To which the daughter sadly says, okay, fine. And she backs down. And then she was told to pronounce this and to say this verse, she did, and then dunk in the water, and she did that. And there was tremendous sadness all about her. She was just in a very sad state. And as the priest is going through all the rituals, in her mind, all she's doing is singing the Jewish songs that she learned at Or Avner. And finally, the priest says, and now to conclude the ceremony of your baptism, I need you to go to that table and light a candle which symbolizes your acceptance of all of this. And there was a table, some candles set up. There was a candle that was lit that she would use to light the other candle. And this brave 9-year-old child looks up at the clock and she walks over to the wall where this table is. And she covers her eyes. And with everything she has inside, she cries out, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kedishanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Shabbos kodesh. She makes the blessing on what she said, this is my Shabbos candle. It's Friday, late afternoon. She's lighting Shabbos candles in a church in Baku, Azerbaijan. She didn't get any applause from anyone at that moment. But on that Friday night in a Russian Orthodox church, she met God at the top of a mountain. My friends, when we read about Abraham walking up the mountain, we're reading about this young girl in Azerbaijan. We're reading about our aunts and our cousins who walked into a gas chamber at Treblinka proclaiming Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. We're reading about Jacob wrestling with an angel. We're reading about Solomon Mizrahi tearing up a contract. We're reading about Professor Velvel Green walking by a hot dog stand. We're reading about a woman who gives up her chiclets gum. We're reading about each and every single one of you, with no one applauding, with no one necessarily admiring your efforts. You make sacrifices, big and small, sacrifices for Judaism, sacrifices for your family, sacrifices for your friends, sacrifices for total strangers. You climb your mountain and you meet God alone on the top of the mountain. My dear friends in Florida and everywhere else throughout the world that might be tuning in, we're going through some very difficult times. We're facing a worldwide pandemic for the past few months that has brought pain and fear and illness to hundreds of thousands, now over 1 million. There is not a single person in the world that has not been affected. I'll repeat that line because it's an unprecedented line. There is not a single person in the world that has not been affected. Physically, economically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. There's not a single person tuning in now that does not know someone that had the virus, that was ill with the virus, that was fighting for their lives, or that has sadly and tragically lost that battle. We have all had our lives altered by this crisis. And for us as Jews, as people of faith, our place to run to in a time of distress has always been our synagogues, our houses of prayer. And that too has been temporarily taken from us. So yes, this is a hard mountain to climb. It's a steep mountain to climb. And we have been and we will continue to climb this steep mountain until we reach the peak. It is amazing. It is amazing how quickly our schools and our Chabad centers, how they responded in a matter of hours, rebuilding entire institutions into Zoom institutions. Every rabbi in the world has become suddenly Zoom experts, learning how to broadcast their Torah classes and their lectures all over the world. Think about it. Immediately when this broke out and we went into shutdown mode and we realized there are senior citizens stuck in homes that can't come out of their houses, that can't get their prescriptions, that can't do their shopping. It happened in every community in the world that literally within hours, hundreds of volunteers stepped forward and said to total strangers, I am here for you. Just let me know what I can do for you. Let me know where I can shop. And shopping, if you recall in the beginning, meant 3-hour, 4-hour lines outside a store. But yet, we all rallied for each other. We were there for one another. We are climbing this mountain one step at a time, one difficult step at a time. But we're climbing nevertheless. Far be it for me to understand God's ways, and why he would place this mountain before each and every single one of our paths in this particular day and age. But I will share this thought, and with this I will conclude. You know, we often speak of the importance of community, of joining a congregation, of worshiping as a group, and so much of Judaism is about kehillah, is about congregation. It's about that shul. It's about that community. It's about doing things together. And indeed, this is of paramount importance in Jewish life, and we long to get back to that, and may it be soon. But I think that every once in a while, it might be a good idea to have some solitude, to spend some quiet time alone, away from the workplace, away from social outings. Pretend the world has stopped. And it's just you and God. Nobody to impress, nobody to imitate, nobody to appease. Just you and him. Think deeply about your inner truths, your beliefs, and your fears. Think about your particular and your personal challenges, your mountains, and utilize this time of solitude, to make resolutions on how you will climb those mountains as our world begins to open up again anew. The strength is there. It's in you. It's in each and every single one of us. Yes, we can, but we need to make the move. We need to start the climb. And maybe we won't reach the peak right away, or maybe it looks invincible, or maybe you're afraid of heights. But you're no different than the rest of us, because we're all afraid of climbing our own mountain. You see, it's easy to climb someone else's mountain. It's far more difficult to climb your own mountain. So if the struggle in your life is within the home, if the marriage is in desperate need of attention and repair, make that the mountain that you climb, and don't walk away from it. If the mitzvot in the home are in need of repair or an upgrade, make that the mountain you climb. And if your mountain is not within your control to change, whether it's health, or economic hardships, or the need, let's say, for a shidduch, for a match for yourself or for your children or for your grandchildren, and you're in need of a miracle, whatever areas of life that distress you, that weigh you down, have that conversation with God. Speak to him using real words, real sounds. Share your tsaris, share your grievances, share your hurt, but allow the room for healing and for reconciliation, and then get on that mountain and climb. May we all climb our own Mount Sinai next week. May we once again accept the Torah with love, with enthusiasm, with humility, with excitement, with loyalty. And may our wedding anniversary, our anniversary with God, be celebrated with the coming of Mashiach, when we will all get to climb the mountain of God, the Har Habayis of Yerushalayim, to visit the Beis Hamikdash. May it be now.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Bryski, for that truly inspiring lecture. It was really wonderful, and I thank you for being a part of this amazing series.
You're
Ladies
very
and
welcome.
gentlemen, thank you. We have a great, great class next week.